As a little child, I witnessed the last day of the Vietnam War, and I seen the North Vietnamese soldiers enter the country. That's pretty much the end of the war. I was born in 1966 in Saigon. I grew up in a Chinese Vietnamese family. At a very, very young age, I was around with photographic medium. My family ran a photographic studio, and people come to our studio to have their portrait done. In between 77, 78, there was the border conflict between Vietnam and China up north. So majority of the Chinese community tried to escape the country, and so my family actually, decided to send the children out. And me, my brother, and two sisters, we were taking the boat journey, and we would spend few days on the oceans, and we managed to get into Malaysia, and I was live in the Malaysia refugee camp Pulau Pidang for 9 months before I came to Australia.
Dacchi has an important role at 4A. He was one of our founding members in 1996, and he worked with us for 8 years, ensuring that there was a really strong platform for Asian Australian artists in Australia to be seen by the wider Australian audiences. Dacchi's work is really important because it looks at a part of Australian history that isn't necessarily seen that much in visual arts, where there are stories that are told in literature, in music, but to see and to encounter his photographs and his installations is to really be immersed in these stories that are very much an Australian story and part of our contemporary history.
The boat project is a full-size replica of the fishing boats I was escaped the country from Vietnam to Malaysia. Most of the people, never actually talk about that experience. Even, the refugee living in Sydney or in Australia, they don't tend to often, talk about their experience, to the children and the next generation. To them, it's way too painful to bring back that kind of memory. And I experienced that through myself. I know exactly how they feel.
The Gillespie Bequest started in 2012 when the art section at the Australian War Memorial learnt that Mr John Milton Gillespie had left us some money in his will to purchase artworks for the National Collection. It's unusual to have just an open-ended bequest not relating to a specific art or conflict, but we learnt that he was a Vietnam veteran and he became a migration agent and helped Vietnamese people move to Australia, so it really felt right that this commission should focus on the Vietnam War.
I got an invitation to come to Canberra to meet the curators and to talk about this commission work. And Anthony was actually showing me around the art collections of the War Memorial related to the Vietnam. We both agree that in the collection it actually doesn't have much about the Vietnamese urban perspective. Many of the refugees come to Australia is a soldier from the South Vietnamese army known as Arvin.
Dacchi then went away and had prepared a proposal for us as to what he'd like to do, and we were really just immediately impressed and excited by that proposal, particularly because he really focused on the relationship between Australian servicemen and Vietnamese personnel during the war, and really focused on interviewing people firsthand, getting their experience and letting that dictate the work. So the Memorials commissioned Dacchi to create 2 major bodies of work. They'll be delivered over a 3-year period. The first is a series of a painting on lacquer that's based on historic photographs of the conflict, and that's based on his process of interviewing veterans over several months.
To make this project rolling, I start with to try to make contact with Australian veterans who served in Vietnam. After spending time to interview for the veterans on both sides, and I decided I need to use some archive materials, and I contact with Anthony and organize to access the archive materials, and it was amazing to see that.
So we have 38,000 artworks in the collection of the Australian War Memorial. They're stored in a variety of different locations, but the largest one is our Works on Paper store. The memorial holds an extensive archive of photography. Much of it is official war photographers or official military photographers. So Dacchi spent quite a while going through many of those albums, and from that selected the images that resonated with the interviews he conducted, and in some cases coming across some of the soldiers that he'd actually spoken to. So that was a really amazing process to watch him select from that collection.
After I select the image from the archive and I actually transfer that image into the board. For these commissions, which is, we're dealing with the Vietnam War, lacquer is part of that kind of culture identity. So that's why I decided, to using the medium which have the most direct to the country's origin of that war. The lacquer is a tree, grow in Vietnam, and the local people actually collect the sap of the tree and make that into the medium which we're using to make an art. So the lacquer work is it takes a lot of time to do. You have to build for many layers. At the end, what you're looking for is super shiny, and it's almost like a mirror. The format of the image is very important. First of all, the length of the work, which is about 4.5 meters long. The strip is basically one strip of the flag of the Republic of Vietnam. This is a very important project for me to actually to take part. As I grew up in Vietnam, lived through the war, and lived through the refugee, all that it become more clear to me. How all that kind of background is actually influenced how my work is.
4A is incredibly honoured to be working with the Australian War Memorial to support this commission by a really important Australian Vietnamese artist. It represents the first in their very esteemed collection of an artist who's Asian Australian. The story and the perspective and the lens in which Dacchi looks at Australian history, in particular the Vietnamese War, allows us to access these historical records with a whole new light.
Yes, I have witnessed veterans that have come from recent conflicts. So an Afghanistan vet particularly springs to mind for me, and seeing them see works that particularly looked at soldiers' experiences and the emotions after war, you can really see how an artwork can be something that a soldier from a previous generation was feeling what they're feeling, because it's in their facial expression that's been captured by an artist. And that to me is one of the most powerful things we can do. If we can help a veteran somehow come to terms with their experience, or just even see that this isn't unique to them, that they're not alone in that, I think is amazing.